All right, we'll just take a few more seconds and then we will get started with introductions and go into our topic for today. And well, we've got a lot to talk about and we shouldn't take away from the hour. So what I'd like to do is we have a very small audience today. We have a very esteemed panel, but I'd like to take today to talk almost like a coffee clutch. So we're going to have a few topics that are going to come up, but I think it's in everyone's interest to be ready to ask questions and kind of have this as an interactive discussion. So without further ado, let me get rolling on our conversation. This is our second annual economic summit. We had one that was a year ago, right before the elections. And then this year, we've moved it to January. This year, we are talking about three very hot topics: inflation, debt, and supply chains. And in that conversation, we are going to have a number of different pivots and opinions, which I want everyone to respond to in their time. So right now, though, I'm going to start with introductions. I'll start with mine real quickly, and then I'm going to step out of the way and try not to talk very much and just help the rest of the gentlemen out. So this is Ken Yeager. I'm with the TMA Florida programming committee, if you will, and on the board for Florida. Have been for a couple of years. I run New Point Advisors Corporation, and I live out of the Jacksonville area. And that is the absolute qualifications for me to speak on any of these topics, which is none. So I'm here to listen and learn as well. With that, start the introductions with Spiro. I want to introduce, oh my goodness, my computer, Dr. Spiridon Patton at St. Leo University, adjunct professor. And Spiro, if you could speak on your background and then we'll move on.
Yeah, very quickly. I have a PhD in economics from the University of Pittsburgh, circa 1978. I've been a college professor, been a consultant, particularly in the past for the tourism industry. I've also been involved in small businesses of my own family and so forth. So done a lot of things. I've in the college classroom now for the past 15 years. And in addition to teaching courses at St. Leo, I also teach at 3 or 4 other schools, depending on their needs. So I'm still a pretty busy guy, even though technically I should be retired. I prefer to do this. And it's good. I haven't been involved in anything like this for some time. It's kind of good to get back and, interact with people and to talk sort of away from the classroom setting. So thank you for inviting me. So I look forward to the rest of our presentation.
Fantastic, thank you, Spiro. All right, next in our group is Ron Scalzo. Sorry, Ron. Senior Managing Director, Supply Chain Operations Practice Leader for FTI Consulting. He's going to lead us on the supply chain side. So Ron, a little bit of introduction on your background.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ken. Yeah, as Ken said, I've been doing this for 35 plus years as well. Kind of a career consultant. I've had some interim management roles. I actually work both distressed and non-distressed companies. So I work through the economic cycles accordingly. But look forward to our discussion today. And I think as a career supply chain operations guy, I never thought I'd see the day where we hear about supply chains on the local news every night. So we'll talk about that. But
it is.
I jumped off SBA. I've got you on the TMA. I'm going to add Bobby.
All right. If you're in the audience, please go to mute. All right. There we go. And all right. And then last but not least, Dr. Rudy Mueller, CTP. Also running his own practice and for many years, and also will be our topic leader on the debt side, as also a menagerie of other things that will come up during our conversation. Dr. Mueller?
Yes, I'm you could call a split personality. I started my career in academia, was a full-time professor, before I went back into industry, but as an executive, run a few companies as CEO, and then became a turnaround professional. Got certified so long ago, I don't even remember when it was almost, but I'm pretty sure at that time my pet was a dinosaur, as my daughter tells me, and have done turnaround restructuring consulting ever since. And if I feel like torturing people, I join Spiro in teaching at St. Leo, one or the other economics or business course.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mueller. All right, so, and also Rudy, for our discussions, our open discussions here today. All right, so a couple of rules of engagement. This is a Zoom meeting. If you don't have something to say, it's better to be on mute. But if you've got a question, please raise your hand, or enter a question in the chat box that's at the bottom. It says chat. You can click on it, and then you'll be able to write a message, which I will be able to read, and then we can give credit to you, and then play it out to our esteemed panel. But in addition, we are going to have we'll have a Q&A formally at the end of this conversation. However, we expect this conversation to be interactive, so please throw your questions up as they come up. Don't wait till the end. That'll be very helpful to everybody, including yourself. So while this is going to be a conversation, it would be best to set the table by having each of our panelists sort of introduce the topic that they're going to cover in this inflation, supply chain, and debt sort of conversation. And so with that, we're going to start with Spiro. And Spiro, I'm going to throw this question to you, and then if you could please then take us, kind of launch our conversation. All right. So the inflation issue is more complex than the general media portrays. From your perspective, how would you characterize the situation?
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. And that particular issue is interesting because I think there's a generation of people, and maybe even more than that, people who have never experienced this type of economic situation with prices. As I tell my students, for the past 30 years, even though prices have risen, they've been fairly low, fairly tame, and inflation really hasn't been an issue for economists, or let alone for the Federal Reserve or any other government body. However, aggravated by COVID and for a number of reasons, now we have a situation where all prices are rising to one degree or another, and that's something new. The point I want to make about it being complex, but at the same time also being misunderstood, because the media has had a habit of sensationalizing a lot of economic events. They don't understand them to begin with, but then they'll sensationalize them. You hear in the reports words like galloping inflation, runaway inflation, explosive inflation. And it brings me back, as I like to say, this isn't Germany of the 20s. This isn't Hungary of 1946. It isn't even the United States of the late 70s at this point. But nonetheless, this is an issue. People are aware of it, and they have to deal with it. The aspect I want to talk about, and it kind of dovetails into the supply chain situation as well, but I want to focus on maybe the one overall situation that affects all prices, and that is the rise in labor costs. To me, that is the part that certainly everybody's aware of it, but it's extremely important because we are a service economy. Even though we have goods and we need goods, at the same time, most of our product and most of our people are employed in services. And service companies have had to raise their prices, particularly if for nothing else to bid up, because there is an unprecedented number of job openings. Everybody's looking for people. And if you want to get people, what do? Very simply, you bid up your compensation. You make it more attractive for them to come in. And the point that I want to make too, at this point to introduce this, is that sure, some prices will probably fall. And certainly Ron can address that from his perspective. Some prices at best, and maybe most of them at some point, will level off. They may continue to rise somewhat. But the point is that even if they level off, they're not going to go back down. And people are going to face the fact that the prices for everything, for the most part, have risen, and they're going to continue to rise. And some may even continue to rise after that, because we're already seeing signs of what I would call, secondary price increases, where you raise prices because everybody else is raising prices, which is a very dangerous situation. But there are some companies trying to get away with that. So it is a situation where we have a number of factors brewing, but most importantly, and I want to make sure I get into this because otherwise it'll get lost. So I'll make sure I say this now. We're at a point today in January 2022 where, now that the holiday frenzy is over and people basically stop spending, obviously they're going to have to take a look at their bills and all of that, but more importantly, they're going to take a look at their overall financial situation and take a look at the fact they may or may not have gotten adequate raises for the year. And they know very well what kind of prices they're facing. And now that all of that is over, they're assessing their financial situation. And, as an economist, what I'm really fascinated by are the decisions that millions of people are going to be making. We're all making. What things are we going to continue to buy? What things are we going to buy less of or find cheaper substitutes for, which is a very rational, very real economic reaction. And most importantly for me, and kind of ties into the nature of this group, what types of goods and services am I not going to buy anymore? Okay, because that's where you're going to begin to see, at least from that perspective, in addition to companies that are already distressed, where you're going to see the real casualties, because there's nothing that these companies can do to force people to buy their product or service if they're unhappy with it. Either they don't like the price, they don't like the quality. And my pet industry that I follow for a lot of reasons, it goes back my years as a tourism consultant, the cruise industry, which to me is sinking extremely fast. And I have a love for cruises, but I also have been following the industry for 40 years. So, I'm very concerned about that type of industry and other type of industries that are going to be victims of, if you will, the pandemic, not so much the virus itself, but the fact is that with the shutdown, you've given people months to think. And I hate to say it because it sounds very negative, but giving people time to think is fatal in this world. Okay. And by that, I mean, when you give people time to think, they can assess their situations, they can make real changes, and they're going to feel very confident about those changes. And there's nothing that you can do to change their minds or to stop them. And that's where I think all these months of shutting down and waiting, now that everything's over, it's all going to come to roost. So in other words, the inflation issue is not just the issue of rising prices itself, but it's the reaction to those rising prices that really, I think, is going to set the tone for certainly, for this year, if nothing else. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I kept that brief. So hopefully that'll help you, and we can take it from there.
I'm feverishly writing notes as you speak. So yes.
I know that's my problem. I'm so used to lecturing under constrained time that I make sure to get it down. You got to keep writing.
Oh yeah, we have enough. I have more questions for you just based on that. So this is great. With that, all right. So
that's the idea.
Yes. So all right. So let's stack on top of that Ron's comments on supply chain.
Sure. No, thanks, Ken, and hi, everybody. But look, yeah, I think these two topics dovetail together pretty well. I mean, look, disruptions for supply chains are not new. I mean, you can go back over the last 20 years. Back in 2000, there was the dot-com bubble burst that had impacts. There was Hurricane Katrina, which was local impacts. I recall an example from that where there was a factory in Louisiana that just made a very simple steel lynching pin for Caterpillar. And they had to shut down factories all over the country because that pin was a critical part, similar to what we're seeing with chips and autos today. Amazon Prime launching 2-day service. That was a big thing when that first came out, and that shook everything up. So you can kind of go on and on. There was the financial collapse in 2008. I think what was a little bit different with COVID for all of us is the severity and the duration. I mean, who thought that 2 years later we'd still be in the midst of this, and we are. That said, I think, again, as I said earlier, never thought I'd see the day where we hear about supply chains on the news every day. But I don't think we're hearing the whole story. It's not a simple fix. It's really a perfect storm, if you would. Consumer, to Spiro's point, I mean, consumer buying patterns have changed. I mean, we were all going towards e-commerce before, online ordering, having stuff delivered to your door before COVID, but think of how much that's accelerated, as a necessity because of COVID. So, we hear about the West Coast ports probably most often. And there's a reason for that. I mean, 40% of imported goods come in through LA or Long Beach ports in the country. I know Governor DeSantis is saying, hey, Florida's open for business. Florida ports are open for business. And there are some ocean carriers that are rerouting to alternative ports, but it doesn't change the fact that 40% of imports come through LA and Long Beach. And the problem there is, I think today I heard again, there's still 102 ships waiting offshore or in some various stage of waiting. A few days ago, there were, I think, 28 actually docked, 14 anchored off the ports, and another 88, which in their shipping business, they call it loitering. Basically, they know there's no place to go when they get there. So when they're 150, 200 miles out, they just slow down and they do a slow crawl towards the ports and hope that there's a place for them to go when they get there. So that's all happening. But the problem is, Spiro touched on labor. I mean, labor costs are going up for multiple reasons. One, maybe they've been depressed, but also there's a labor shortage, which it's simple supply and demand, which we all know. But there's also a huge equipment shortage. You hear about these things called chassis, which are the simple trailers that a 40-foot container gets put on before it gets hauled away from the port. There's a chassis shortage, believe it or not. There's also a container shortage, and part of that was driven by the inflation on ocean shipping prices. Pre-COVID, on average, to ship a 40-foot container from China to the West Coast, for example, was maybe $3,000, $3,500. I've seen cases now where for the same container, $20,000, $22,000, $24,000. Now that price will come down. Labor costs will not. Fuel prices may eventually come down, but not anytime soon. So some of these inflationary impacts are here to stay, and others will probably normalize. The other issue with container shortages, because of those exorbitant rates of say 20,000 a container coming from China, carriers have been shipping empty containers back to China because it's a lot faster than waiting for them to get loaded for an export. So it's caused a shortage for companies who are trying to export product as well. So there's delays there. So, part of this disruption in the past, it's happened where what's the push towards nearshoring and onshoring? I think I'm seeing some of that for taking a little bit more hold than it has in the past. I think when some of that certainly occurred in the past, but when the crisis goes away, the natural tendency is to still go back to the lowest cost solution, which is often Asia. But I have clients myself where we've worked through scenarios where they're looking to relocate manufacturing capability to either the U.S. or Mexico. Walmart actually announced by 2023 they're committed to buying another $50 billion annually of U.S. produced product to put through their supply chain. The economic estimate for that is that could create 300,000 jobs in the U.S. economy. So those are just some examples. We have seen the rebound. I think manufacturing or output in the U.S. is probably going to be up about 7% last year, whereas it was down maybe 2% in 2020 when we were all trying to figure out how to cope with this pandemic. So those are just some thoughts. I mean, I think there's a lot packed in there. So hopefully we can get into some discussion about it with y'all today.
Great. Thank you, Ron. One quick question before I move on to Rudy's comments, introductions. Is there, like Spiro, is there a particular industry where you spend more time or have more fascination at this point in time?
I really work cross industries, but from an operations standpoint, it's manufacturing, whether it's industrial. For example, I have a client that's making energy storage devices, which are basically almost like 40-foot containers filled with batteries and all the AC and componentry that, their end customer is to sell to wind farms and solar farms. As they capture that energy, they've got to have a place to store it until it's needed. I mentioned the auto chips. I mean, clearly we're seeing a huge impact with autos. I mean, if you try to buy a new car, you may be waiting several months before you get a build date on it, even in some cases. So, but I think for the manufacturing related industries, certainly consumer and retail, there were a lot of short things not on the shelf for this holiday season. In some cases, still sitting out on a ship, waiting to hit port. So those are probably the big ones.
Got it. All right, thank you. All right, Rudy, let's talk in your area. Where is the inflation and supply chain debt landing in your box? What's the hottest topic?
Well, first of all, I can echo what Spiro and Ron already said. COVID, the pandemic, accelerated things. It didn't cost things for the most part. And as Spiro said, interest rates, for example, people get very upset about current interest rates and inflation. Well, I remember in 1979, 80, when I was a student at the University of Michigan, I had a CD and I earned 18%. Needless to say, if you were buying a house back then, your mortgage was higher than 18%. People have a very short memory. Even if we go back, let's say 15 years or so, interest rates for mortgages and so on were much higher. Well, the same thing holds true in industry. Industry got so used to these very low financing rates that they can currently get from bank lenders as well as non-bank lenders. And there's another shift, and I'm pretty sure I see Michael Picard in our group here. He can echo that, because I actually heard it from one of his colleagues at PNC, that their biggest concern right now is not competing with just other banks, but with non-bank lenders, which historically have been a lender of last resort, now becoming mainstream lenders and highly competitive. And right now, if you have a mortgage of, let's say, 2.8%, 3%, 3.2%, my advice is hold on to it for dear life and don't pay it off early, because interest rates are rising. And that has an effect. And I don't have a crystal ball any more than anybody else, but my prediction is that with the rise in industry, and the Fed already has made it very clear they're going to raise rates, you will be probably in a very near future get to a point that you can earn more on your money in other investments than you pay on your mortgage. For corporations, the same is true. On top of which, the federal government has poured huge amounts of money into the industry in form of PPP, EIDL, and other loans. Well, PPP, you have a chance to get that forgiven. You have to file your application and so on, but EIDL is not forgiven. You have to repay it. These programs, many of them have already sunset, others will sunset in the near future. And that means that the companies have to pay that back. They have essentially borrowed their way out of trouble, out of bankruptcy. And now when the chickens come home to roost, somewhere someone is going to hold out their hand and say, okay, pay me back. So the result of that will be that companies, for some of the reasons we already heard from Spiro and Ron, in industries that are as an industry distressed, because we see a fundamental shift in the economy. People are not going to shop on ground as much. So certain types of retailers will be very much distressed. Manufacturing, services, all of this changes. And if you're in an industry where your business will become maybe not obsolete, but certainly decline, as opposed to other industries where you will have huge opportunities, because so far we always have looked at the negative. For every company, every industry that dies, there will be opportunities for others that come up with new business models, new ways to get to the customer, and so on and so forth. but they all have to repay the current ones. They're sitting on loans, and now the bills come due. And as a result, I would personally predict that, especially in the state of Florida, where the vast majority, I think last statistic I read, about 80% of jobs are dependent on small to medium-sized businesses. I think it's even higher than that. They will get into trouble. There will be a wave of bankruptcies, is my prediction. I don't know whether Spiro or Ron agree with that, but I see a wave of bankruptcies. And for the people in this room, this might be an opportunity to make some money. I'm hoping we're all in the TMA. As nasty as that may sound, we thrive on distress.
Yes.
So that are my 2 cents of worth of comments, maybe a little bit haphazard, but I certainly would love to hear questions, comments, or disagreement for that matter.
Well, Rudy, while we're getting questions come in, and everyone please use the chat, as I said before, to do that. Do you have a particular industry, Florida or otherwise, that you are tracking more with, or have had more, seen more issues with of late?
I see 2 actually that I have been extensively engaged in. Actually 3 really by extension. One is the furniture industry that Ron already commented on. The furniture industry a few decades ago moved almost wholesale to, let's say, the residential furniture industry. We have to qualify that because the Sodders or Sullivans of this world, they never moved. They were highly computerized. They had nothing to be gained by offshoring. But the residential furniture industry moved a lot of the business to China and other Asian countries. But they came, and this started before the pandemic, by the way, they found out very quickly there is a huge disadvantage to doing this. Because when they ship those ready-made furniture back to the US, they are basically shipping a lot of Chinese or air. Because these are not RTA furniture, they are blanket wrapped, they are boxes, and what are they filled with? Air. So the transportation costs relative to the value of the merchandise in the container are relatively high. So those had already started to come back to the United States, with the difference, however, that they outsourced because, and I've been in many of those, especially in North Carolina and surrounding area furniture companies were so old. If you took a tour of them, when you came out, you were looking for the wreck where you had hitched your horse, facetiously speaking. And now they're coming back, and because these factories were shuttered, they are now rebuilding along the same model as the RTA furniture manufacturers and the office furniture manufacturers around Grand Rapids and Holme in Iowa and some others had done. State-of-the-art CNC machinery, state-of-the-art intra-building logistics, and so on and so forth. So that makes it very efficient for them to come back and sell furniture and make furniture over here. The other one that I can comment on is automotive. I've run actually an automotive tier 1 that had about 75% of the market for their components of the 4 big Class 7, Class 8 truck manufacturers, specifically Navistar, PACCAR, Freightliner, and Volvo. And there too, a lot of that stuff stays in the United States. In part, in this particular case, there's somewhat of a difference because you have a lot more regulatory restrictions and customs. For example, when Freightliner has a truck in Germany, that truck doesn't run over here. I mean, it would physically run, but it would not be permitted on the road. For example, the fold-away strength of an outside mirror. Well, if 2 trucks pass each other on a 2-lane road in Germany, their mirrors from the air pressure alone are going to fold flat. In the United States, the rules are so different, they will not fold flat. The fold-away strength is much different. And there's so many different examples. So yes, there is engineering cooperation in the case of all four, but the manufacturing has to be local, at least as close as Mexico, where, for example, Navistar has a huge plant that, ironically, in our experience, because we supplied to them, they were pickier in terms of quality than their US counterpart.
Okay.
There were certain rules on chrome plating, and if you get a Navistar truck out of Mexico, it has actually better chrome plating on there than the one manufactured in the US. So, but I digress. So yes, those are the two. And as the third one that I mentioned is, of course, construction industry, which the companies that I run were primarily suppliers to the furniture industry. And many of these hardware suppliers also supply to the furniture industry, commercial as well as residential. But I could go on and on and on. There are plenty of examples.
Well, let's do that, but let's have Spiro check in too. He's had a moment or two to think, and we'll get to the questions that are starting to come up. But Spiro, you had mentioned inflation and talking about how things are. I'm trying to get to my quotes here, but job openings was one of the comments that you had brought up, and there was a few statistics a few weeks ago. One that there were the most job openings ever recorded, something in the order of 11 million. And then there was, just at the same time, there was the fewest number of people looking for jobs in the US at the same time. And this all feels, one could say, okay, well, this is all a bunch of COVID stuff and everyone's sick. But I recall that going back to February of 2020, we had the lowest unemployment number ever recorded in the US before COVID was a thing here at 3.5%. Is this how much is COVID driving this versus we were headed down a path of inflation and labor shortages already?
Well, yeah, fair question. Actually, the COVID issue it comes in a couple ways. One of the reasons there's an unprecedented number of job openings is that you have two groups of employers going after the same people. One, as you always have, you have the winners. You have companies that are winning, that are expanding and very clearly need people. They're willing to pay for those people, and they're opening themselves up to bring those people in. You always have that. However, now you have, and because of COVID, you have the companies that have been trying to get back from the months that they were shut down, are trying to get back just to some, whatever they consider to be their normal operating position. And they're looking for people at the same time. And as I like to tell my students, because I've just begun to talk about this topic in my classes, they don't necessarily have the funds and the money to attract people the way that the winners do, but they still need people. And so you have both groups of employers after this group of people. I don't know if it's a record number in terms of the lowest number of people looking for work. The problem is it's a constant. There's only so many people out there who are available. But one thing that is interesting now, and again, some of this is COVID related, but I think too, it also has to do just with the fact that when you have so many job openings, and this is something that we haven't seen before, now employees for the first time have an opportunity to, if you will, not only leave their present employer if they're unhappy with it, but they can very quickly find another position. Now, if you go back, say 3 years, to 2018, 2019, to very strong years, you didn't have that many job openings. So if you were unhappy with your employer, and I'm not just talking about a money issue, but also your job satisfaction, the culture in that employer and so forth, whatever it might be, the intangibles, if there aren't a lot of openings out there, you're going to have to think twice about leaving. Okay. Unless you want to start a business or something, you're going to think twice about leaving. And as they say, to use the phrase, you're going to suck it up and deal with it. Now you don't have to. Okay. If you realize that there's a lot of opportunities out there and you're unhappy with your employer, you're more likely now to tell that employer, basically, you know what, I'm fed up here. I'm not happy with my situation. We've seen a lot of people leave their jobs. And I've not only seen this, but I know of people personally who've left their jobs because of an intangible reason, that they're not getting any, if you will, approval or recognition from their superiors. They've done things during the pandemic. They, went beyond the call of duty, and basically they don't even get a thank you for what they've done, let alone any other kind of recognition. But now you can leave, say, you know what, I'm not happy here. I can go to a competitor, do whatever, and I can leave. And I think that's a big part of this. So yeah, it doesn't bring out a lot more people, but the real issue is not so much the number of people looking for work as the extent to which you have employers who are looking for people to fill their positions. And it's all over the place. I mean, we go to shopping complexes, and just about every single establishment has a sign out, help wanted, whatever it is that they need. You don't often see that kind of situation. So there in a nutshell is sort of the answer to the question.
Okay, well, and let's try and reconcile that with Ron's earlier statement that people like Walmart are trying to bring jobs back to the US or back to North America. What, Ron, first you, and maybe then Spiro rebuttal. Ron, what's going through their heads? Is there a math equation that makes sense to come headlong into this situation?
Yeah, I think there is, in part, but the finding labor is going to be the biggest challenge to a lot of that. I think it's a parallel. I mean, Ford announced they're building this massive complex all around EV, both batteries and electric vehicles, where they're going to spend over $1 trillion over a period of time, I think, too. But they're going to have to find the people to do the work. But I think from a supply chain perspective for Walmart, it's how do they localize? How do they avoid the disruption? How do they avoid the over dependence on Asia, for example? So we're seeing a lot of that. And maybe back to the labor issue. Truck drivers, I think we've all heard this, that's not a new problem. There has been a shortage of truck drivers for years, but it's exacerbated by the pandemic. I mean, so the ATA, American Trucking Association, says there's probably going to be a shortage of 80,000 drivers by the end of 2022. And part of that is it's an aging workforce, number one, but also with all these other demands and rising wages in other areas, an over-the-road trucker, I mean, he's gone for often 2 weeks at a time and sleeps in the back of his truck. If he can go make the same amount of money and sleep in his bed every night, there's alternatives out there. It's a tough business, and part of that is pay's going up big time for drivers, because in order to get people to do it, you got to pay them more, and that's not going to change.
Is automation going to be driven?
I mean, I think we will see the autonomous vehicles. It's going to be a long time coming for commercial trucking. I think there are some safe over the road lanes where it'll probably pilot, where you're running long distances on a straight line on an interstate somewhere, but I think the penetration of that is going to take time. So I don't think that's an immediate fix. Really now there's I think there's about to be legislation passed where, at least on a pilot basis, they're going to lower the driving age, the age to get a commercial driver's license from 21 to 18, trying to recruit younger people, trying to recruit more females. So we're looking for more diversity in that driver workforce. But again, it's also going to require raising higher pay for a truck driver.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. I'm going to take a group question. I don't want to lose that side of that thread, but I want to also answer questions from the audience. And so Andy has posed one for Rudy. Rudy, you want to talk about where your over under is on debt versus other catalysts for interest rates?
Sure, but I want to just a quick and politically incorrect comment on Ron's statements.
Sure.
If more people want to sleep at home at night, will that raise the rate of divorce? And create a market for divorce attorneys?
It might.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that. No, the question is whether I do think that the primary driver for the wave of bankruptcies that are predicted will be the raising interest rate. And the answer to that is yes and no. So let me qualify that. Since February 2019, I have been involved with over 40, actually over 45 bankruptcies. Of those, merely about 4 or 5 were directly caused by COVID. And those were exceptional cases where, in these cases, the business started just before COVID hit, and before they even got out the ground, they had to shut down. Clearly, that's COVID. But all the others had issues that preceded COVID. They had nothing to do with COVID. COVID simply aggravated that. One case, to Ron's point, I have a trucking company. They have over 100 trucks on the road. There's 20% of their drivers are missing. The owner himself is actually currently driving trucks on the road, and so is a couple of his management teams. So will the interest rates cost us? No, not directly. They may contribute if they go up, because, as I said earlier, companies have borrowed a lot of money. As those interest rates rise, a lot of these loans, with the exception of a few SBA variants, have adjustable rates that adjust over time. As the Fed raises rates, so will the cost of lending go up for these businesses. That will put certainly a nail in their coffin, but fundamentally, it's their business models. A lot of companies do business because they've always done it that way. Let me be facetious here. And instead of that, they need to keep, in this economy, which is changing faster than probably any time in history, Spiro, correct me if I'm wrong with that, they need to keep their eye on the ball. They need to keep their eye on the horizon. How will my industry look in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and down the road? If you don't do that, if you don't adjust to, let's say, door deliveries, get in bed with DoorDash or whatever to help you with deliveries, see that your product may need modification. Computers have become a very hot commodity these days, simply because so many people work from home. They need their own new laptops. Their old machines were no longer valid. Their kids have been using now computers from home because they didn't go back to school. Now it's starting to open up. It, on one hand, offers a great opportunity for agile companies that think on their feet, but it is a huge threat for companies that lack the vision. It's not so much the money will contribute. Yes, if you are tight for cash, yes, you may end eventually up in bankruptcy, but if you're growing, did you take out lines of credit that accommodate that growth? 3 years back, not today. Once your supply chain is impacted because you can't pay your suppliers, it's too late to go to the bank and say, hey, I need some more money. Because now the bank looks at your financials, they look at what's going on. You have payables that are way overdue. You may not get that loan, or not at least under good conditions. You should have done that years ago. So for those that were negligent, all of this is going to cause a huge problem. It's essentially what economics has done since almost centuries. It weeds out the ineffective players and replaces them with more agile, more visionary, better competitors.
Thank you.
Did I say that correctly, Spiro, economically?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, you're right. I mean, that it is part of it. And I always say, in any type situation, even extraordinary times, those that don't don't do what they're supposed to do as a business, and don't keep up and don't manage their their operations successfully, sure, they're going to become casualties. That's part of the deal. Okay, there's no even though, yes, sure, right now there were a lot of government handouts and everything to try to keep people, but ultimately that can only go so far. In the long run, if you don't make it, well, it falls right into your hands. Yeah, they're going to be distressed. They're going to file for bankruptcy, and whatever happens to them is going to happen to them. Sure.
Spiro, here's another question for you. It's a two-part question.
Good times for the TMA then, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well said. Well said, Rudy. I like that. Spiro, kind of piling on here from, going back to the labor issue that you have found, you kind of found in this conversation on. Are there other, and I think very limitedly as others do, about where inflation has hit in the past? I can't recall an instance where labor was the driver of inflation versus other commodities that sort of pushed prices. Are there examples where labor has been the a main component or the main component of inflation?
Fair question. Well, let put this way. Let's go back to the late 70s and I even before that a little bit. And one of the differences between then and now.
Yeah.
Okay. Labor, in a sense, labor costs were very much a participant, but they became a participant. In other words, the driving force behind the inflation, particularly in the 70s, was when OPEC got a hold of the oil market in 1972, and then basically for the next 8 years controlled the price of oil successfully, very successfully. However, what that kicked off was something that already existed. It had been involved in the government. It also had been involved with the labor union contracts, what they used to call escalator clauses, which basically became known as cost of living adjustments, COLAs, where basically based on the year change of the consumer price index, there was an adjustment. The standard rule was 70%. So if the consumer price index increased, say, 7% in a given year, then your cost of living adjustment was 4.9%, which you got automatically on top of whatever else you were able to earn for merit and everything else. And that became pervasive in the later part of the 1970s. Now, by that point, the majority of employers and workers were subject to cost of living adjustments. And now it becomes part of the mix. So in other words, as I used to explain to my students, I'm going to have my hands, you can see this. Okay, so I explained to my students back then, because that was always a hot topic. They were trying to figure out what was going on and said, look at this. Okay, let's say, okay, I got a raise this year. All right, so I have more money in my pocket. I think it's great. But what's going to happen now? Because labor costs have gone up, employers are now going to compensate by raising their prices. And that goes up even more. So now you face yourself where instead of you think you're ahead of the game, you're now behind the game again. But next year, guess what you get? Another cost of living adjustment. And you see, it starts to feed on itself. It literally becomes a cat and mouse game. They used to call it in economics, the term was the wage price spiral. I like to call it accelerating inflation. That's dangerous. Okay, that's where if it isn't controlled, that's where you get the kind of inflation, even the triple digit inflation that you experience in other countries. And we were just starting that process in 1979, and it was basically, as I like to tell my students in the simple terms, the Federal Reserve in 1980 basically choked the economy to death by basically cutting off credit, and that put an end to it. But that's a very drastic measure. Okay, that's the difference between then and now, because right now we haven't seen the cost of living adjustments. Yes, and I can say it for myself. Us Social Security recipients are getting a very nice increase. I'm going to get it in 2 weeks, in fact. So because we had the highest increase in the consumer price index in a number of years, and is one of the highest adjustments. I think the increase came out to something like 5.2% for this year. That's a pretty nice increase in benefits. Okay, so, but that's part of the deal.
Won't that, to the microcosmic version of that, does that going to cause retirees who are watching their 401ks increase and now the retirement benefit increase, have more people exit the labor market and forcing more issues? Or is that not a factor?
Well, that could very well happen. What one thing is happening is that as it did in 2008, a lot of workers have been really forced to retire at an earlier age than they normally would have because of they were shut down or whatever the case was. In 2008, you had a lot of companies went after a lot of the older workers because of their costs and basically gave them severance packages or whatever. But some of them weren't ready. Okay, in other words, they were retiring at 62. Or even earlier than that, rather than waiting until they were 66 or even 70, which is the maximum age that you can get Social Security benefits as far as the money that you can get, which is what I did. So that is something that is happening. We're seeing it again, maybe not in the same numbers. I know in my wife's company, for example, a big financial service company, they did a voluntary severance package. The difference is that they didn't just target this for older workers. It was across the board. Even my wife, everybody got a voluntary severance package offer. Okay, so we looked at the numbers and basically my wife evaluated, said, all right, we're going to think like an economist now. And turned out that you'd be better off waiting, until you reach standard retirement age, which I think in her case is 67 because of her birth date, rather than, if you will, taking the package. You'll be better off that way.
Okay.
So some workers are taking advantage of that, but they're doing it. They're doing it because they're looking at their numbers. They're seeing they're going to can earn a nice income outside of Social Security from pensions or otherwise, but they're retiring at 62, let's say, in which case they're going to get the minimum allowable benefit. And I can tell you between 62 and 70, the difference is about 40%. You get 40% less at 62 than you would waiting until 70.
Okay. All right. Very good. Rudy, you had a comment you wanted to pile in on?
Yeah, and this is a potentially controversial comment, but we, in my opinion, have a fundamental structural problem in our labor force. Let me explain that. The one part that is missing, and if you look at our national labor market, it's actually borne out, is the middle level of skilled labor. We have a lot of unskilled labor in the country, and that labor cannot compete with the third world. That cannot compete with Mexico or China or whatever. And then we have the highly educated that obviously make a good amount of money. But what is missing, unlike what we see in Europe, where you have this mid-level of people that hold vocational but highly skilled vocational positions, and that is missing, and it's becoming actually ever more important. Let me give you an example. If you're producing a gear wheel for a transmission, in the past, you needed to know math, but on the old machines, a lot was manual and so on and so forth. Today, you have to be almost a PhD in mathematics to run a CNC milling or lathing machine. And that skill level is still rare and far and in between. And that puts us long-term into a bind. We need more of this, or our national income distribution is going to flatten out. It is actually flattening out if you follow the statistics over time. And I'm pretty sure Spiro will confirm that. He looks at it closer than I do. And we need a concentrated effort, has nothing to do with COVID, to actually raise the educational level, and especially in that mid-level, the highly skilled welders. I mean, come on, right now, if you need a welder, a top-notch welder, you pay that person $120,000 a year. $120,000 is more than many MBAs and other master's degrees make sitting behind a computer. And actually, from a personal point of view, welding is actually fun. If you are an undersea welder, an oil rig welder, you make more than that. And that goes to show the need, the dire need we have for these kinds of skill sets. Companies can't fill them. This is basically along the same topic that we have heard from Ron, from Spiro, and so on. We need to start urgently to address that deficit in the structure of our labor force. That's just my 2 cents, and feel free to disagree.
All right. Well, thank you, Rudy. I think that is a fundamental structural issue. We've got 2 more questions and probably not enough time to answer them. So I'm going to split the baby here and see if I can get this. This one comes directly to you, Spiro.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and I wouldn't be rude. I heard Rudy speaking, but I was since Andy's asking a question regarding the components of the money supply, I was actually over here on my desktop on the Federal Reserve website, checking the numbers, which I should have done before this. Now, I haven't seen a breakdown, Andy, as to how much of our inflation is driven by the shortage of labor and the rise in labor costs versus issues of the supply chain. At least I haven't seen any studies that have broken it down. My guess is it's probably maybe, I don't know, give or take, but let's say might be about 65, 60, let's say 2/3 labor and 1/3 supply chain at this point. And that's just my quick sort of gut reaction to it. Now, you make the comment about monetary inflation due to money, and that's where I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding on a lot of people. Yes, we have printed more currency. We have printed more money directly. Not as much as you suggest. We don't have printing fairies operating 24/7 at the Bureau of Engraving and printing money. However, we're a credit-driven economy, and what really drives the banking system and our money supply is the creation of credit. And that's one thing, of course, that has happened in a great amount over the past couple of years. In fact, most of the increase in our money supply since, and the data I have here goes back to July 2020, has been increases in bank deposits. Not only what we call it demand deposits, we used to call it checking accounts, but especially savings accounts. There's been a tremendous acceleration of savings accounts since 2008, and the pandemic only aggravated that because, again, why? A lot of people basically are putting money away, in anticipation of either getting laid off again, or as some do, believe it or not, people have even gotten used to the idea of the Christmas club. They put money away to take care of their bills for the holidays, and then they wait for their statements to come, and then they pay them off and do it again. So in fact, our money supply now is driven more by increases within the banking system because it's a credit-based banking, monetary system. The focus is on the banking system, and as long as banks continue to grow in deposits, they have the fuel that they need to create more credit, and that's what really drives the economy, and that's really what's happening here. It's a credit-driven economy. And the other comment to make too is that unlike 2008, where we had a partial collapse of our financial system, this time around, banks really weren't affected, other than the fact operationally they were affected because some branches had to close. And even now today, some closed because they're COVID issues and whatever. But other than that, in terms of their overall financial strength, they really weren't affected by that. So in fact, this is it's been great for the banks. They really haven't been hurt by what they've done. If anything, they've seen an increase in business from both business lending and personal lending. So hopefully, I try to say that quickly. I hope that addresses your question, Andy.
I appreciate you taking a rapid, quick stab at it. Thank you, Spiro. What this also has done is put us to the end of our allotted time. And in deference to our other speakers and to the schedule, we'll have to stop here. I apologize. We do have a recording of this. It was asked. The rights and who gets to see copies is something we'll sort out after this call, because we are doing this for the TMA Global. But we do want to make sure we share as much information as possible. With that, and sadly, because I think we were just